Is it open or is it closed? Are we dealing with Schrödinger's strait? I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, Schrödinger's cat. We all know this from our education, or we've watched an episode of The Big Bang Theory. I watch Big Bang a lot. So, Schrödinger's cat. Is the cat alive or dead? That's really the question we're facing here with the Strait of Hormuz about whether it's open or closed. It depends on who you talk to. I would say right now it's probably a little bit more closed. We have competing blockades in full force right now. The Iranians are executing their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, whereas the U.S. is executing its blockade out in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. So, two competing ones. Doesn't mean we don't see ships crossing through both of them. However, it is definitely not a clear and open passage. We're going to recap week 7 of the Strait of Hormuz crisis and give you everything you need to know for the past week and what to be thinking about going forward. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. As we always do in these videos, we're going to take a quick snapshot here at the Strait of Hormuz. So right now it is April 19th, about 2 p.m. on the U.S. East Coast, and we are not seeing much traffic moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Ships like Rich Starry are still sitting there waiting to go through. We don't see any traffic either heading through the international shipping way here, south of the Strait of Oman, or up here through the Iranian Channel. If we head over here to where the U.S. blockade is being done, so the U.S. blockade is running here from the from the Iran-Pakistan border all the way down here to the northeast part of Oman. We do see ships heading in and out. However, what we have seen is all the Iranian ships and ships that have docked in Iran be turned around. So no ships are coming out past that line into the region. We know that there are U.S. naval vessels in here based on the press reports and from the briefing we got over at the Pentagon. General Kane talked about the fact that roughly 8 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are prosecuting this blockade, backed up by the USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group, and the USS Tripoli and its amphibious ready group, along with the USS Canley, an expeditionary support base, and the USS George Bush has sailed into the Indian Ocean and should be arriving in the area shortly. We also have USS Boxer, which is another amphibious ready group. That vessel is in the Western Pacific heading for Singapore as we speak. And then you still have USS Ford and its strike group up in the Mediterranean. So a lot of forces at play here, all at the same time. That we had an update put out by the Joint Maritime Information Center. So JITMIC has been putting out their updates. This is a pretty extensive one. I want to break down some of the key components for you. I'll, of course, have a link in the show notes so that you can go directly to them. So first, the regional threat overview. So the overall maritime risk level is at critical. However, I do think that JITMIC may want to think about updating this to the level I use, which is critical, but bordering on going to poop. I think that's really where we need to go. I have a feeling that JITMIC would love to put this on there, but they haven't quite done it. However, the rest of the areas are critical here. The Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, whatever you feel better calling it. I had someone the other day tell me that since I called it the Arabian Gulf because it was written there, that they were unsubscribing and leaving. Okay. I mean, if you've got that thin of skin that you can't listen to me read something, then, I mean, off you go, I guess. So Arabian Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, critical navigation interference, blockade enforcement, mine reports, residual kinetic risk, risk of attack or miscalculations in the Strait of Hormuz. And then out in the Gulf of Oman, Arabian Sea, historical projectile UAV strikes, naval presence remains high. I also would argue that the blockade does raise some issues about criticality by the United States. And then other regions at moderate Eastern Mediterranean, North Red Sea, Suez Canal, Southern Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb, cheers, and the Gulf of Aden. And obviously, that last one, the Southern Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden is really critical because of the fear right now regarding the Houthi and any potential attacks by them. We then have the maritime incidents and traffic assessment. So 33 confirmed maritime incidents Since 1 March, there's been no attacks on ports or maritime infrastructure in the last 72 hours, but overall risk remains substantial, driven by the potential for renewed kinetic activity. Remember, we're in the midst of a ceasefire right now, although that has not really stopped everything. That ends on Tuesday going into Wednesday. Now, most interesting here has to have been over the last 2 days. Just did that video the other day talking about the mass exodus out of the Strait of Hormuz that was attempted on Friday. We've got some assessment now on those numbers. So on 18 April, there were a total of 19 transits. Outbound, 6 transits through the northern route. Using the southern route, we'll talk about those in a little bit, there were 5 transits. Now, inbound, all passed north of the traffic separation scheme. Then finally, a little more of a data breakdown here for you in terms of freighters. On 18 April, 8 ships, 5 of them heading eastbound, that's outbound, and 3 of them heading westbound. On the same day, 11 tankers, 6 heading outbound, 5 heading inbound. So that is a total of 19 ships. You had 10 ships on 17 April and 4 on 16 April. And if you look through the week here, we're sitting there almost at coming into double digits most of those days. So 8 ships on 12 April, 5 ships on 13 April, 3 ships on 14 April. That was really the lowest point we saw. 6 on the 15 April, and then just 2 on 16 April, and then we hit those double digits at the last 2 days there. But right now, we're not seeing literally anything coming through. Charts at the bottom there show you the passages through both the Strait of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb. All right, let's recap the week in news. And for this week, I went a little bit different here. I wanted to expand out the international impact of what we're seeing right now in the Strait of Hormuz. So April 12th, U.S. military to block ships from the Iranian ports after talks yield no agreement. So the breakdown in the peace talks over in Pakistan led to the United States preparing to initiate their blockade. Now, as I've noted to you in the past, I think the U.S. is using this as a leverage to bring the Iranians back to the peace table in Islamabad. Plus, the U.S. really could not execute this blockade because the forces they had available were being used for offensive missions against Iran. With the ceasefire, they can reallocate forces now to accomplish the blockade mission. Australia acts to secure urea amid supply risks from the Iran war. So fertilizer is one of those key commodities that comes out of the Persian Gulf that we've talked a lot about, and you're not going to see immediate impacts from the shortfall. Instead, what's going to happen is a shortage in fertilizer will take hold over the planting season, and then you see decreased yields at the end of it. So countries like Australia, which is heavily dependent on Middle East fertilizer, has to find alternative sources for it. And so that's what you see. A lot of countries are going to be scrambling for this. Russia, the United States, Morocco, big suppliers of fertilizer out there in the world. So Australia is working to bring it. Now that's going to change trade patterns. You're going to need bulkers to go to different places than the Middle East, and that elongates what we call ton miles. Same time, Asian LNG imports plummet to 6-year low on Middle East crisis. So Asia, absolutely dependent on liquefied natural gas. This is April 13th. And now all of a sudden they're at a 6-year low, meaning that if you need liquefied natural gas in Asia, you got to go to other routes. Australia is almost at its capacity. It's got a little bit damaged from some cyclones that came through. Getting LNG from the United States is an option. However, you have to go through the Panama Canal, and there are restrictions in the number of ships that can go through, particularly the big lane, which is limited to about 10 ships a day. So getting that liquefied natural gas over to Asia is going to be an issue. One of the big benefactors of this could be Russia, that can send that liquefied natural gas via their northern route, but that's a much longer route than getting LNG, for example, from the Middle East, or even for Russia itself, which has been delivering LNG to Europe. There's another source, too, that we'll talk about here. NATO allies refuse to join U.S. Hormuz blockade, deepening rift with Trump. So a big issue here regarding the role of NATO in the use of the blockade. Watched a great video over at Ward Carroll's channel. He had Justin Bronk on, and Bronk did a great job talking about how NATO is actually supporting this conflict by the use of military bases in Europe. It was really interesting. It was much more defensive in nature, that they're using the bases and the U.S. is able to stage from them. But it was an interesting discussion. But this issue about bringing NATO in has been a very polarizing one, obviously. So, April 14th, day 3 of the week, U.S. sanctioned tankers test Trump blockade with Hormuz exit. So, what we saw was a U.S. sanctioned tanker that Rich Story did not come out of the Persian Gulf. Matter of fact, it stayed within the Persian Gulf and did not come out. And this is going to be a big issue here. Are ships going to challenge the U.S. blockade? What we've seen is the U.S. challenging ships and turning them around. What they've mentioned in their statement that was posted by the U.S. government, by Central Command, is that they will intercept, divert, and if necessary, board ships. They have not boarded any ships, although we're getting a lot of blockade porn showing that the U.S. is training for that and are prepared to do it much like they did against Venezuelan tankers. The difference here is boarding Iranian ships. There could be precautions taken on the Iranian ships, military personnel, booby traps, you don't know. Plus, the U.S. says it's also going to divert, intercept, and potentially board other vessels, neutral vessels that have used Iranian ports. What if you get a Chinese flag, Chinese-owned, Chinese crewed ship? That raises a lot of questions here. Also on 14 April, there's another conflict going on. Let's not forget, up here in the Black Sea, Russia drones hit Ukrainian port, damage a Panamanian-flagged vessels. So we're still seeing conflict, and I think this is the big issue we have talked about over the 5 years of this channel, is a breakdown in the freedom of navigation and hostility at sea. Remember, 2022, Russia invades Ukraine and ships get caught right in the middle of it. And over the past year, we've seen an escalation of strikes by both sides against shipping. Also on April 14th, global oil flows plunge as Hormuz disruption chokes tanker trade. So global seaborne crude oil shipments have fallen 16% since the start of the Iran war. Now, I did a whole video talking about the fact that empty tankers are heading to the United States around Africa, going up, and how people were celebrating that for good reason. The U.S. is going to be able to export more oil. We may go up from 4 million barrels per day to 6 million barrels per day. However, that is not enough to make up what is lost from the Persian Gulf, and more importantly, because of the elongated sailing distance, about twice the distance, is about 52 days from Houston to Shanghai, vice 22 days from Ras Tanura in Saudi Arabia to Shanghai. You're going to need twice as many tankers, and they just don't exist. So this is going to create a problem. All right, April 15th, a Iraq-bound tanker sails into Gulf after second attempt at Hormuz. So one of the things we saw was an announcement by Iran that they're going to allow Iraqi tankers to sail. Very interesting. Again, Iran and other countries are trying to work deals out in the midst of everything. And so what we see is this Iraq-bound supertanker, the Agios Fanoris 1, had sailed into the Persian Gulf and now is up in Iraq. Question is, do they allow this ship out either through the Iranian blockade? It should sail without a problem through the U.S. blockade, because the U.S. is just blockading ships going into Iranian ports. Also on April 15th, China moves to block entrance to disrupted South China Sea shoal, images show. So this is Scarborough Shoal out in the South China Sea. So while we're focused on the Middle East, guess what? There's still issues happening else around the world. China and the Philippines have been in this for a long time. We had that very infamous clash between a Chinese Coast Guard and Navy vessel and a Philippine Coast Guard vessel that led to the two Chinese ships colliding. I'll have the video up here for you to take a look at. I mean, that was a dramatic moment. And so we're seeing challenges of freedom of the seas, not just in the Black Sea, not just in the Red Sea, not just in the Persian Gulf, but also in the South China Sea. Also on April 15th, double blockade keeps Hormuz shipping at fraction of peace level. So this is when we saw everything kind of midweek there hit the fan, so to speak, in the strait. We had very little traffic going through. You saw those numbers we talked about earlier, single digits, low single digits going through. Basically, everything was locking up in the strait at that moment. Going on here, U.S. turns back 10 ships as Iran port blockade holds. So this is the very initiation of that blockade. And so we saw the U.S. using their forces to divert and turn around ships at that moment. Also on April 15th, maximum pressure returns. U.S. targets shadow fleet tankers as Iran oil waiver expires. So we saw the end of the Iranian oil waiver, and that meant even oil loaded onto Iranian ships could no longer sail under the previous removal of sanctions. Now, there was a same thing done for Russian tankers, and the notice came out that the U.S. was going to let that expire, but we've just seen a notice come out literally today that Russian oil is still giving an extension, so you can still trade on Russian oil loaded up to April 17th. So again, they're pushing Russian oil out on the world's oceans to try to help stabilize the situation. However, Iranian oil no longer can be traded. I mean, this is the weirdest friggin' thing, can I be clear, in the whole situation here. This argument back and forth on Iranian oil, the fact that you could trade Iranian oil unsanctioned early in the conflict, then all of a sudden now, not only is you can't trade it, but now it's blockaded. Again, it's one of the strangest things in this story. April 15th, I talked about where else LNG can go to Asia. Well, here's one that Europe is looking at. Europe eyes Canadian LNG as Iran war rewires energy routes. I would argue that not just Europe, but also Asia is looking at this. Canada is on a precipice here of really developing an LNG export industry. It will be interesting to see how Canada responds to this. They're looking at selling this LNG on the global market. I think it's going to go to Asia more than Europe. I think it's easier for the U.S. to shift to Europe and supply them, although Europe has an issue with buying American LNG. But again, they're buying Russian LNG faster than ever before, even though they say they're going to cut it off on January 1st, 2027. I'm not sure that happens if this conflict is still going on. We'll see. We have this one on April 16th. Half-full tanker heading to Japan highlights scramble for oil. So you almost never sail tankers at below full. I mean, they're either full or empty. It's one or the other. It's black and white here. There's no really in between. But the fact that Japan is getting an oil tanker that has filled halfway up in a ship-to-ship transfer off the coast of Malaysia tells you how desperate they are to get oil into the system. They'll take it. They don't want to wait. And so what we're seeing is half-loaded tankers sailing to Japan. This creates a real anomaly within global shipping. You just tend not to see this very much. And so nations are going to be scrambling to fill it. Now, Japan has a large strategic petroleum reserve. They have the third largest on the planet behind U.S. and China. So Japan has access to this, a lesson Japan learned in World War II. Don't get yourself caught without fuel. They are definitely doing all they can to prepare for this. Matter of fact, they've just brokered a deal with Australia to provide Australia with refined products. So Japan is really using some diplomacy here in the background of this crisis to cement itself in some key commodities. Also on April 16th, U.S. expands Iran blockade with global boarding powers, broad contraband crackdown. So had a video on this. We talked about JITMIC provided a full list of what is contraband, but more importantly, the blockade would not focus on boarding ships potentially just in the Gulf of Oman and the Northern Arabian Sea, but this brought Indo-PACOM command into this, Admiral Paparo, and now all of a sudden that boxer that's in the Western Pacific may be used and its amphibious ready group to potentially board and investigate Iranian ships in the South China Sea, around Malaysia, around Singapore. It's a vast expansion of the potential maritime domain. We just had a story over in Lloyd's List, as a matter of fact, talking about this, about the potential on war risk expansion in the area. I think all of this is kind of playing out here. April 17th, Pakistan oil tanker makes rare entry and exit through Hormuz. So this is the Pakistani tanker Shalimar, and it's one of the few tankers we've seen not only been able to come out, but go back in to the Persian Gulf. It is right now off the coast of Pakistan in port, offloading. It was able to get in, and again, for nations like Pakistan and India, Persian Gulf oil is absolutely crucial. It is close by, it is quick, and Pakistan, which does not have a lot of tankers, no matter what the President of the United States says, it's not a huge, massive fleet that they have, are crucial for really doing fast, quick shuttles to do this, supplemented by other ships. So this is a key element here for a nation like Pakistan. Also on April 17th, Iran and Trump declare Hormuz open, but route mines and U.S. blockade cloud reality. So this was the opening of the other day when we had the kind of hysteria that happened on Friday. And again, it always seems to happen on Friday. I can't help but note that President of the United States loves to make announcements early in the morning on Friday concerning the Strait of Hormuz, or after the market has closed on Friday. again, not saying anything. I'm just saying what has happened. Just look at the evidence here. And this is what we saw. We heard announcements both from President Trump and from the Iranian foreign minister that the Strait of Hormuz was open. But then very quickly, what we found out was the Strait of Hormuz was not open. And again, go watch the video here. We did a whole breakdown on this to give you the exact information and data about what happened. It was a cluster there. I think the phrase we used was batshit crazy day, and it was. Also, this Europe moves from rhetoric to planning as Paris summit weighs Hormuz security mission. So the Europeans are realizing, number one, that they are absolutely essential to use the Strait of Hormuz. So they are moving ahead with multi-mission plans to secure commercial shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. However, they are not willing to do this until there is a more concrete ceasefire or end of hostilities in the region. So don't expect to see European Navy showing up sooner rather than later to really execute convoy movements through the area. They've done this on a very limited basis down in the Red Sea with Operation Speeds, deploying anywhere from 2 to 4 ships at a time down there, but they're moving very few ships through that strait at any given time. Hold the champagne. Oil recovery faces weeks of delay as supply chain shocks deepen. Okay, even if today President Trump, Bibi Netanyahu, and the leaders of Iran get together and have a peace treaty and peace in the Middle East is declared, it is going to take not weeks, but months to clear this up. Understand, ships are out of position. The global distribution system is in chaos. We're starting to see the shortages hit in key areas. It's going to take, even if you start loading tomorrow at Ras Tanura, for example, it takes you 50-something days to sail from Saudi Arabia to Europe. It's going to take a long time to fix all of this, not the least of which, if I'm a shipping company, do I go back into the Persian Gulf thinking that these three, Iran, Israel, and the United States, can go back at it again like it's a WWE match? So probably not. So we have, first off, irreparably damaged shipping into the Persian Gulf. Second, it is going to take forever to fix this. Look at what happened with the global supply chain crisis. Look what happened with Ever Given. It's going to take a lot of time. Also on April 18th now, Ukraine strikes 2 Russian refineries, Baltic seaports. So as Russian oil becomes more important in the global economy because, again, of a disruption of 20 million barrels a day coming out of the Persian Gulf, and yes, we're getting some substitutes for that. We've got about 1 million coming across the UAE pipeline. We got 4.5 million coming across Yanbu into the Red Sea. We're still missing about 14 million barrels of oil. So Russian oil has been a big one. Ukraine has taken this moment, and they've done this quite consistently during the conflict, to expand and target oil refineries, not just near Ukraine, but throughout Russia, including up on the Baltic, which is absolutely crucial. And we're seeing this in the region of Ust-Luga and the entire Leningrad Oblast, that's that region around St. Petersburg. This has been going on the entire time, and these oil refinery hits are very significant. We have this one: fresh attacks shatter the open Hormuz narrative as Iran pushes new maritime regime. Again, talked about this the other day. Everything that happened, we had a series of attacks. The UK MTO reported these. We had an attack on an Indian vessel that the narrative is out there. You can hear it. We also have an attack on a CMA CGM container ship, and then also attacks on the fleeing cruise ships that came out of this area. All those were gone through UK MTO. There's audio out there. I played one for you on the Indian tanker that was played. There's a lot of audio videos being played out there. Some of them I'm dubious of. There is a distinct sound when you broadcast across VHF. Some of them don't have that, so I'd be careful with that. I try to, when I find one that I think I can authenticate and get multiple confirmation of, I'll post it. But right now, I'm just leery of some of them that are coming out here. And then this one: India flags deep concerns over attack on 2 Indian ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Again, false images out there of tanker explosions and things like this. According to the attack on the Indian tanker, it was by small IRGC boats with machine guns spraying at them. And even though you're on a 309,000-ton crude oil tanker, yeah, I mean, machine guns hitting your bridge wing is not great. I mean, you don't want to get shot at. You're going to turn around, even though there's literally nothing a machine gun can do to sink the vessel at all. but you're worried about obviously escalating attacks. Now, U.S. CENTCOM has come out and talked about the fact that helicopters are flying over the area. I question, where were those helicopters during these attacks? They were not there during the attacks that were staged against these vessels. That's because it was a completely uncoordinated, look like bolt for the strait when this occurred on Friday. And again, I think both sides got to be very careful about what they say, because they're going to get merchant mariners killed if they're not careful about this. All right, last story here. Cruise ships seized brief Hormuz reopening to flee Persian Gulf. So we talked about the fact that the very first ship to leave on Friday was a cruise ship, the Celestial Journey, but then she was followed by 4 other ones. But because of the research abilities here at What's Going On with Shipping, we were able to find a photograph of that crew on board that first cruise ship that bolted through and give the full stubing to Iran as they sailed through the southern straits. Hats off to them and welcome aboard the Love Boat. So anyway, I had to have a little bit of fun there for just a second. I will say something about that transit, however. The 5 cruise ships that came out ran, first off, there's no passengers on board. People were asking if the passengers on board. No, passengers have gotten off a long time ago. They were repatriated, flown out of the Persian Gulf. And yes, there are cruise ships that journey through the Persian Gulf. It was very common to do this. The ships had skeleton crews on board based on a report from Cruise Industry News. And more importantly, the ships maxed full speed. They ran through the southern end of the channel. So here are the track lines of the 5 vessels that came out, the 2 Celestials, the 2 Mein Schiff vessels that came out, and the MSC cruise ship that came out. But the area I want to focus on right here is obviously in the strait itself. Let's go ahead and add the traffic separation scheme here. I'm going to change over to the nautical chart feature. People ask me all the time, marine traffic gives me access to marine traffic. Very kind of them to do that, but this is under their enterprise plan. That's why some of the features aren't available to you. But here, if you look at the track lines of the vessel, this is the southern channel here. This is the outbound lane typically used. This is the big Raycon buoy. A Raycon is a buoy that shows up on radar. There's actually an image that shows up on your radar, and here you see the route that these ships took. The depth in water here is in meters. So we're talking about roughly 100 meters of water here. So this is fairly deep water. I mean, we're talking about over 300 feet of water here. There is plenty of water here. Now, it does raise an issue that a lot of people are asking, is like, hey, if Captain Stubing and the crew could use the southern channel, why aren't more ships doing that? And the problem is that there was an attack on one of the cruise ships somewhere in this area here. There was a report of falling objects in the water. Now, not clear if that was missiles or, one of the issues the Iranians have is they can put mines on missiles and drop them into the water. So there's a lot of concern that you can still fall under attack. I think the cruise lines took the advantage here of the confusion to head out as quickly as they could. These ships are not generating money for the ships at all. A lot of the other ships in the area are part of larger container lines and tanker lines and everything. For example, the 2 Celestial ships there, they're the only 2 ships in their fleet, so obviously they were not making money, hence the reason to kind of take that crazy move and go ahead and sail through the strait. Anyway, that's your Week 7 update on Strait of Hormuz and the U.S. blockade. Hopefully you get something out of these videos. Again, trying to put together a little bit, too, of a little historical record here of what's happening so that later on, I can go back in and write a history about this, because I think it's a really fascinating event and how it's playing out right now in the Strait. But I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Again, if you're a subscriber to the channel, always check. YouTube loves to drop people off. I don't know why, but they do. Please do that. If you can, support the page. How do you do it? Well, you give it a big thumbs up. Hit that thumbs up button down below. You can share it across social media with other people or by word of mouth, any way you want to do it. Hey, follow What's Going On with Shipping on YouTube. Or you can support the page directly. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. I post these videos to Patreon. If you become a member of Patreon, no commercials. You get to watch them without that. If I get a video done early, I'll post it to Patreon, so you'll have it. I've also got the videos on X, on Blue Sky, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and over at Spotify if you want to watch the video or listen to it as a podcast. Until our next episode, this is Sal. Sign off.